Mental Health News Radio, produced by MHNRnetwork.com. Your source for information about our favorite subject, mental health. This show is brought to you by our incredible sponsors like ZenCharts.com, the intelligent EHR for addiction treatment organizations, CompliancyGroup.com, making sure your behavioral health organization is following HIPAA and compliance guidelines. Remember, folks, audits are never fun, but passing them because of working with Compliancy Group helps you focus on treatment. EverythingEHR.com, devoted to helping organizations find the best electronic healthcare record software in behavioral health. And Service Dogs by Warren Retrievers, SDWR.org, a nonprofit organization that provides service dogs to those with unique abilities and invisible diseases to include autism, diabetes, epilepsy, and PTSD. Until there's a cure, there's a dog. And hey, an SDWR service dog is at work every day, making a difference with one of our own team members. Our incredible sponsors help keep this show on the air and advocating for everyone affected by mental health. Guess who that is? That's everyone in the world. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey everyone, this is Kristen Sunanta Walker, host of Mental Health News Radio, and I'm here with two guests, one that's been on the show before, Wendy Conquest. Wendy, thanks for coming back on again.
Absolutely.
And a partner in crime, so to speak, Dan Drake. Thank you for coming on for the first time on our show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're going to get into some really cool topics today. Wendy, will you give our listeners an update on your background?
Sure. So I'm located in Boulder, Colorado. I'm a psychotherapist, licensed professional counselor, and I'm also the director of SACC, which is a sex and porn addiction treatment center that I opened last year. So I've also written prior book to this one called Letters to a Sex Addict, The Journey Through Grief and Betrayal. And I would say a passion of mine is to understand and create paradigms for change, and especially around people's inner concepts of themselves, and also if they're struggling with sex addiction, pornography addiction, what healthy sexuality is, for me to be of help to them.
Wonderful. And Dan, tell us about your background and then how you and Wendy ended up writing a book together, which I'd love for you to name for our listeners.
Sure, be happy to. Well, again, my name's Dan Drake, and thank you again so much for having us on. I'm in a group practice in Studio City, California, and just outside of, in Los Angeles. And we do primarily work with sex addiction, and also I'm a certified sex addiction therapist and a certified clinical partner specialist. So we do work with betrayal trauma as well that we've experienced, that we see from the men and women coming in as partners. So just that's what we've been doing over here. I've been doing this specializing full-time in this about 10 years now at this point. Yeah, I'm really excited. The book that we have out, we just launched it actually, called Letters from a Sex Addict, My Life Exposed. And would love to tell you more about it. The first book that Wendy wrote was really impactful for me. I get to use it in our practice, and I found it was really helpful. So what it is it journeys through the process of grief that partners of sex addicts experience. And I found it so helpful for building empathy for the addicts I was working with, as well as helping partners to get some support and having resource. So I approached her. I don't remember when this was. Wendy, do you remember?
Yeah, it was October 2013.
Your memory's better than mine.
Yeah, we were at a conference at the same time, and you came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I love your book, and I've been using it, and I think there should be a companion book to it from the addict's perspective." I said, "You know what? I've been thinking the same thing. I think that's great. You want to write it with me?" Yeah,
and Dan,
that's how that started.
Had you written before, Dan?
Nothing. I've never published anything. I write articles and blogs and things like that, but never any project like this. So it was exciting and daunting, and it morphed along the way into what it is. But it's been a fun project to work on, and really, I think it's a really helpful book for the community. That's what we're most excited about.
Yeah, I love how, again, the first one is Letters to a Sex Addict, and then this one is Letters from a Sex Addict. So you're right, it is a companion book. And I remember, Wendy, from our first show, we really did get into the mind of the partner that's dealing with someone who has sex addiction, porn addiction. We had a lot of thank yous from listeners that find that there's so much out there about the addict, but not much support out there for the people in relationship with them. So I thought that was fascinating that we had so much feedback and just so many thank yous for sort of telling their story.
Oh, that's great. I'm really, really touched and happy to hear that. To segue into part of the book is that Barbara Steffens, who is prominent in the field of betrayal trauma, and betrayal trauma is a new term for what happens to the partner of a sex addict or a pornography addict. And Dan is extremely well versed in this field. He's on the board of, I always get it wrong, Dan. What's the name? It's ABSAT. I always get it wrong.
It's ABSAT. The Association of Partners of Sex Addicts Trauma Specialists.
Interesting.
Yeah. Go ahead. And so Barbara Steffens wrote so well in the foreword how when sex addiction was first identified and being treated, that the wives, I'm going to call them wives, were encouraged to get into therapy, but basically to help support the addict in his recovery. And so what she was experiencing, the blow up of her life and her identity wasn't being addressed. And so I would say, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say only in the last maybe 5 to 6 years, we've identified that the partner goes through a traumatic experience. And now we're saying that it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder is what she experiences. It's now finally, I believe, being acknowledged and treated.
And I would say what I've seen is that it's primarily the men and women that come in. A lot of times, of course, sex addiction and the impact knows no gender or orientation or anything like that, but we get a lot of heterosexual couples where the male is the addict and the female is the partner. But it took a lot of women standing up and saying, I'm not a +1 in treatment here. I need, there's a lot going on, and I can't just be adjunct to his treatment. And I all the brave men and women, but a lot of women that have stood up over the years to say this isn't okay. We need to change the whole paradigm, like Wendy was saying, which I'm so grateful for so many people standing up to be a part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, I've done a number of shows on this, and yes, every time we get thank you, for validating my experience. And I know we're going to talk about the new book, which is Letters from a Sex Addict. And I guess since this is a companion show, talk to me about where a sex addict, when they're writing their letter, give us an example, if you can, of a letter, and also how a sex addict is able to get to a place where they can really feel what their behavior has done to or how it has affected their partner. Because they have to be enough out of the addiction or enough on the road to recovery from the people I've interviewed to even be able to be out of their own stuff enough to feel how much of an impact they are actually having on, the people that are in their lives.
Yes, absolutely. And Kristen, that's a really good point. I'll start with this, and Wendy, if you want to take it after. I think I do want to say, first of all, we get this question. I think it's just to put this out front. We wrote all the letters ourselves, so we didn't solicit clients to write them. We didn't want to compromise any of their confidentiality or anonymity as well. So we wrote them all ourselves. But I think to your point, we had to make a conscious decision. So Wendy's first book tracks the grieving process from beginning through grief. And we chose to correlate the phases for the addict from the beginning all the way through recovery. So the first few letters or the first section of the book, the addict is pre-discovery even. So he doesn't get it at that point. So they're a little difficult to read, but we wanted to track what does that experience feel like from someone who doesn't get it yet. And then later on in the book, it looks different. He will get it. But we wanted to have that visceral feel, the experience of what it feels like. So he won't get it. So the first letters are very blaming and shaming and criticizing and denying and using rationalizations and all these things that addicts do at the distortions that they do at the beginning. And then along the way, he comes to get it. So that was the journey that we were really trying to portray through letter form.
Yeah. Wendy, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes. So again, just to reiterate, Dan and I wrote all the letters, and it was such an interesting process because I would write a letter and send it to him, and then he'd say, oh my gosh, this makes me think of, and then he'd write more letters and send them back to me. So it was this really beautiful, collaborative, this creative, organic process. And then we went back through all the letters and basically said what's missing, and then flushed out the different stages and different aspects of the stages that we thought were missing. And as Dan said, the first section is pretty brutal because they're in such denial. And so in this book, we were really mindful and careful to, in every section, say, this is where this person is in the addiction recovery process. And so we address partners and say, hey, if you're hearing this, so I'll just read it right out of the book for partners. If you're hearing your loved one say these things, this is the addict talking. Please do not take this in as true or rational or even what he really feels and believes. You may find yourself feeling crazy or confused by your partner's behaviors. You may feel that something is wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. You may have even discovered part of your partner's behaviors only to have them easily explained or turned on you. Please know that you are not alone, and find a therapist who specializes in sex addiction who can help you understand what may be happening in the relationship. So we're really guiding the partners and the addicts in every chapter to, hey, if you're relating to this, this is where you're at and this is what you're going to need.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It is, to be the partner of someone. And I know this is not, as you said, Dan, this is not just one gender. Have either of you found, I know the answer to this because of how many people I've interviewed, but just for our listeners, have you found that there is a difference in the kind of treatment that gets provided and the kind of behavior, or the difference between a sex addict who is male as opposed to female?
I can start with that. And,
Sure.
So I've definitely had male partners come in, and I definitely see female sex addicts, and the men that come in are few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I think that there's a lot of shame that goes into seeking help when your wife is the one who is having affairs, online sexual activity. That's pretty hard to say, hey, I've been hurt by this.
Right.
I think for the guys, the men that I have seen, they go through a very similar experience as the female partners. So they're experiencing shock and denial and trauma, and it takes them the same amount of time to heal from it. I'm very appreciative for the men who have come in because they just do better with that validation and support.
And I would say, and I agree with everything you're saying, Wendy, one thing I've seen from male partners of addicts, that there's already not enough resources for partners of addicts at this point, but there's so few books or resources at all for male partners at this point, support groups, anything. So that gets really difficult. But I've definitely seen, in terms of male addicts versus female addicts, of course everybody's different, so it's hard to make general statements, but oftentimes, a male might be dealing with pornography, might be more isolated, or he could be acting out with prostitutes, massage parlors, he might be paying for sex. A lot of times women that would come in would be working on, there might be relationship addiction, love addiction. There might be a fantasy component that's involved. So multiple relationships or serial relationships, those kinds of things. So, and I think we've got this in our society. We have, and Wendy, you named this, but this gendered concept that somehow if a man's acting out, I think then it becomes this, oh, well, of course, boys will be boys. There's this whole thing there's this patriarchal system that's still involved. I see, but you have a female sex addict who's coming in, and then, there's all kinds of negative labels that get associated. The guy is a player if he's acting out, and a woman, if she's acting out sexually, there's a lot of names that we give to women.
Absolutely.
So there's all this stigma that Wendy was talking about that I still see.
I know in interviewing a colleague of mine who bravely came on the show, his former spouse definitely he was dealing with her sex addiction. And when he sought out treatment for it or tried to talk to, his friends and family about it, his male friends' reaction and even some female friends were, dude, you're lucky to be married to a woman that craves sex. And I just, I just sat with him and said, I'm sorry that's the response you got, because it sure doesn't feel like a big pat on the back, does it? It's betrayal.
And nobody can know. That's the other thing. Esther Perel talks about the staying after infidelity as being the new scarlet letter that we have in society. And I think that is so true that, it's easy to say, oh, you should do this or you should do that, or oh, what's wrong? There's debate in our field if sex addiction is even a real thing. So I'm aware of that there's a whole section of people in the mental health field that don't think sex addiction is real.
Yep.
It's sex. What's the problem? How can this be problematic? But what we deal with, and that's one reason why I'm so passionate about this book, is because we wanted to show, again, the visceral experience, not just talking about it, but at the core of all of this, why someone becomes addicted to a process or a chemical. It's at the root of most of it. It's just pain. And someone's choosing to medicate somehow.
Yes.
And it becomes destructive for them and unfortunately, for their loved ones. Families get destroyed. It gets really painful. And that pain gets transferred.
The irony is that it's not even about sex. I mean, so it's intriguing for a lot of people. Ooh, sex addiction, what is that? And
it sounds sexy, and you're like, there's
it does
sexy about it. Thank you very much.
and it sounds daring and a lot of fun, and that's the irony is that it's. Patrick Carnes says you can take sex addiction and draw a line right through it and put intimacy disorder, right over that. And that's, I think I can speak for Dan and I both, this is what we see all the time in treatment is, the acting out takes place sexually, but it's a deep, deep need for connection and for being seen and heard. And the addiction is a very pale experience of that.
Right.
And I think that's part of why it gets repeated over and over again. It's, well, maybe this time I'll get
what I've been searching for. Right.
Right.
Or what I think. What I think my needs are. I know when I interviewed Stephanie Carnes, Patrick Carnes' daughter, we talked about that it's so much more about the chase, the hunt. The actual act itself is almost, I'm trying to think of the word, but it's not the act itself is not the grand finale. It's the hunt and the chase of it. And people have to remember too, we're dealing with your brain chemistry is being altered because you're in addiction. So all of those neurotransmitters that are firing, dopamine and, just your adrenaline, all of those things are coming into play while you're in the chase.
Yeah.
Right, of course. I mean, why would someone, it's usually about that chemical surge rather than it is about a sexual act. Why would someone masturbate for 6 hours straight, edging to the point of self-injury, injuring their penis? I mean, that's not fun. That's someone who's trying to prolong an experience and that chemical bath that they're going through.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I had someone who, I don't know if he still is, but at the time he was a sex addict, and he did finally admit that to me. And he was married and calling me all the time, just crazy, calling me, because he was getting an emotional connection with me. And I was starting to figure out, okay, this is not healthy because it doesn't feel healthy for me. So I started to put the brakes on the communication and back off, and this is not appropriate because we were supposed to be working together. And I could figure out, just because I'm in this field, okay, so there's something going on with this person and they're emotionally connecting with me because I'm easily to emotionally connect to. That's why I'm a good podcast host about mental health. But I did ask him one time, so what would you be doing right now since I've asked you to stop calling and it's getting, a little bit, it's getting beyond comfort zone that you're still calling. What would you be doing right now if you weren't calling me because you have children at home and you have a wife? And his answer was, well, I would be at my office watching porn and masturbating. And I said, well, okay, you're not going to call me anymore, and you need to go to a therapist and deal with your sex addiction. And the response was, I don't have a problem with sex addiction. I said, dude, if you're doing this with me and multiple women and you're married and you're staying at your office at night instead of being at home with your wife and children, that's called an addiction, and you need to go deal with that. But people don't, I think there's such a, there's the stigma of it, and then there's the sex addiction. No, this fear of it when that's exactly what it is. And there are therapists that can help you with this.
Yeah. And there's critique of our field saying that we're sex negative and that we're creating problems that aren't there. But I mean, the destruction that this causes in someone's life it's real. It is very real. And it's sad, and it's really sad to see the pain that people go through. That place that someone is, just say my definition of sex addiction is it's an intense hunger for intimacy, but a terror of it at the same time.
Absolutely.
So it's a craving for it. But in most sex addicts want to stay in their relationship. They don't want to leave their relationship, but they're terrified to be all in. If I'm all in here, for me personally, there's no one that can hurt me the way my wife could.
Right.
Because she knows me more intimately. She knows all the vulnerable, things about me. She could exploit those. But part of intimacy is having that safety that we move forward regardless. And that, that's part of the beauty of intimacy is vulnerability. But that's terrifying for someone who, might have had trauma in their own past or whatever it might be to get them to that point.
Absolutely. Wendy, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah. So in my community, there are many therapists who will have people come into their practice, and they're really getting so much better at identifying when someone is having a pretty serious problem with infidelity or sexually acting out, and they send them to me. And where a lot of therapists aren't comfortable and aren't educated in treating this. And it's hard work.
Yes.
And when people are brave enough to say, this can't work anymore. I can't do this anymore. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to figure out what this is and to do something different. That's pure courage, I believe.
Yes.
And every time I have a client come in and they say, oh, Wendy, this is going to be hard. And I said, this will be the hardest thing you do. This is the hero's journey. And you'll learn things about yourself that you've never known before, but you'll find out who you are, really.
That's
because you're
so
not the
pivotal.
addiction.
Absolutely. That's so, we're going to make a meme out of that. That is so pivotal, Wendy, the hero's journey or the heroine's journey, either side of this. I mean, doing that work in any kind of therapy, but there's so much taboo and so much shame and guilt wrapped up with sex. That is why it's so difficult to, and I see this too with people that, they're in 12-step programs. They've got their chip for 10 years of sobriety from drug and alcohol abuse, but they're not really fully in recovery because they've just switched addictions. They're addicted to porn. They're addicted to sex. They're addicted to whatever else. And so good for you that you're, not drinking and doing drugs, but those issues that were there, that were part of why you were drinking and doing drugs, they're still there. You're just self-medicating with something else now.
Yeah.
How true that is. We sometimes have people come in, 10, 20 years sober from chemicals, and they say, I realize that this is at the core of things, or that this was underlying it, and I need to get help for this. Which is, again, I think that's what you're saying, Wendy, is super incredibly courageous. And I think I used to take that for granted as being a therapist, that people are supposed to come in and share their deepest, darkest pains, and we work through that together, and I sit with them in that healing. But I more and more, I just honor that willingness to change. And I never take that lightly when someone's willing to be open and vulnerable about something that's incredibly painful and shameful, especially, that they're willing to let me in on that journey. And that is either an addict or a partner, that this is an incredibly difficult thing to trust another human being. So I never take that lightly. I think it's incredibly courageous, and I really honor that.
I think, too, when people first come in and they're just starting out, one of the questions that I almost always get is, well, how long is this going to take? And
life.
And I'm chuckling. Yeah, I'm chuckling because this is now. This is a lifelong journey of evolving into a better and better person, a better and better human being. And so, it's sort of like, okay, I've learned to meditate now. How long do I have to do this? Well,
so your toes up.
It's now
in the ground.
It's now a practice. Yeah, it's a practice now. This is something you incorporate into everyday life, right? To keep you sane. I think that a hard thing for me to see is when the partners come in and they have questions like, well, wasn't he thinking of me? Like, weren't you, so they say to their husband, weren't you thinking of me? Didn't you, right afterwards, didn't you, say, oh, that's horrible. I'm never going to do that again. And so I think part of our hope in creating the book is to show both the addict and the partner all the different dynamics of how this addiction manifests. And there's compartmentalization, there's minimalization, there is a real desire to not feel your feelings. When big feelings come up, I can't have those for a lot of different reasons. So I have to steer off of the fear. I have to steer off of the pain. I have to steer off of the anger. And so I'm just going to do these other things that have a sexual component. And it's so difficult for the partners to understand. If this book does anything to allow people to really get the dynamics of what happens inside an addict's mind better, then I think we've done our job.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hard not to take it personally. It's so hard, but that is a place. I mean, as much as it is the hero's journey for the addict, it can be the hero or the heroine's journey for the person that is in partnership with the addict, because it cracks you open too. And it's your opportunity to heal and work on, why are you in this kind of a relationship? What is it about your past? I had to do that with my ex-husband and his affair. It forced me into my own therapy, and 25 years later, he's my best friend. But yeah, you've got to go through, and I'm grateful for that experience. But, it's people look at us like, my God, yay for you guys, you're friends after 30 years. Well, yeah, you know what? We walked on broken glass for half of that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank God. Yeah. But you have to, when I talk to people about this, I always think, listen, you are going to go through those stages where you are checking every receipt. You are looking on their computer to see, is there hidden porn? You are, you are going to go through those things, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of going through that healing. And I think it's helpful for addicts to know, so that they don't, why does it they don't trust me? I can't get through this if they don't start trusting me. Well, no, You're just going to have to deal with the fact that they have every right not to trust you, and for the addict to know that this is a normal stage for their partner. They are going to have their own paranoia and their own this and that. And also for the partner to know that, yep, this ruminating and obsessing, this is all part of the deal.
It's part of trauma. Yeah. It's what happens with post-traumatic stress disorder. Absolutely. It's part of, when you think of the person who was your closest ally and support as now the person who's wounded you more than maybe anyone else in your life, that's incredibly altering to someone's reality. So yeah, we often get that addicts will get into treatment, and they'll maybe even hit the ground running. Sometimes they don't, but let's say he gets a 30-day chip and maybe even a 90-day chip. He's really excited about it. And then he's baffled when his wife is upset. And I think for him to know, until she gets to know who you were, she's never going to get to know who you are.
Yeah.
I'm a new guy. I'm a changed man. Well, 30 days, she's just finding out about 15 years of acting out history. She didn't even know that was happening. So how is she possibly going to know who the new guy is? So it does take time, it takes a lot of patience. And that's hopefully where, again, we want to tie the two books together, where if I'm working with an addict, I'll help use Wendy's book to say, okay, this is her anger. Her anger is a gift right now. She's in the game. She's still here.
Yeah.
She's in that, and the women will say that, that I find a lot of times the addicts, one of his biggest fears is, okay, I go all in, I go into recovery, and she could still leave me. So that's a big fear that he has. But I will say to him, her biggest fear, one of her biggest fears is look at safety. There's no guarantees. There's no guarantees of your recovery.
Yes.
Or that you won't act out again. So you need to know, she's choosing to take one step forward in this relationship in some kind of faith that you're going to be in a program and that you won't act out again. But there's no guarantees on either side. And you might do all your recovery work, but she still might leave. And we hope that with movement and empathy building and all of the things of walking on broken glass together, that there is transformation, but we don't have any guarantees.
Right.
So it's scary.
And even with, I trust my ex-husband completely because of everything that we've been together. I absolutely trust him. And even still in my own dating new people, I still have that little piece of me that waits to see, I'm going to secretly find out that they are addicted to like child pornography, or that that still runs through my head. Like, I hope I don't find out something disgusting that I just didn't want to know. Not that that's what my ex-husband did
work
at all.
How do we get you trauma work?
Oh, believe me, I get plenty of therapy. I'm starting EMDR actually this week to work on
good for you.
stuff. But
good for you.
I have no issue going to therapy. I love it. I go in and out of behavioral health centers for business reasons. And whenever I sit down in a therapist's office and I'm there to talk about something other than my therapy, I always go, I just feel so comfortable sitting in the chair in a therapist's office. I just love it. So yeah, but just to kind of show listeners, even still, when you've done a lot of work, there's still residual trauma that can happen when you're trusting new relationships that come into your life, even after decades of different types of therapy. That's just the way it is. It's like a friend of mine saying, when am I going to learn, Kristen, and get to that place where I know that I've figured it all out? And I said, when you're dead. That's what life is about.
Yeah, that's true. When partners come in, one of the things I say to them is, I'm really, really sorry this is happening to you. This should have never happened, and I'm sorry. And for every partner I work with, there's some wake up call. I mean, there's definitely a wake-up call for the addict, right? I mean, it's like, okay, it's time to look into your childhood and adolescence, because I totally believe that when the addict is in charge, that's a regressed part of that person. That's a kid, and they even sound like adolescents, when they're in the addiction. So it's definitely his time to start figuring out how he got here. For the partner, without them taking on responsibility or blaming themselves for the addiction, it's okay. So how did we get here? How did I get here?
Right.
And did I give too much in the relationship? Did I let some integral pieces to my self-care go? Do I think I'm worthy of love? There's just a lot of questions that the partners start to ask after, and I say, this happens really organically, after a lot of focus is on the addict around what he's done and what, the horrible things that he's created. Later on then, she says, I just wonder, now I have to kind of think about how we did this dance together.
Yeah.
In the marriage or in the relationship.
And I tell you, it's so worth it, to all the listeners that are going to listen to this. Of course, everyone's journey is different. And if someone needs to leave, if it's become abusive, of course, always, do not stay in those situations. But if you are in a situation like mine and several other people I know, and I'm sure many of your patients, where you both do the gut-wrenching work, you can come out on the other side of it with this just vulnerability and intimate connection with another human being that opens up the door for you to have more and more and more and more of those types of relationships. I know that my work with Michael, my ex, who gives me carte blanche to talk about him on any show, my work with him has enabled me to have very close friendships with men, and that's not something that I ever thought would happen, but only because I sat up in therapy and said, okay, I was angry with him for 2 years. He calls those the frost years. But now let's talk about what role did I play in all of this? So it's hard to get there, though. So my hat's off to the two of you for going there with this, because you're right. It's not widely accepted at all in behavioral health.
Right. And that's why we wanted to make sure that, what does it feel like? It's not, people are like, oh, that sounds fun. If I had an addiction, that's a fun one. But
Yeah.
It's not fun. This is not fun. And we want to be able to see, what does this look like later on? So if the addict is stuck earlier on, can he see, okay, there's some movement to be made. The way you're talking right now, there's a lot of distorted thinking that's going on.
Right.
So helping him get some perspective, but also what kind of partner, if someone's really doing the work and in good recovery and they're healing the intimacy disorder parts of this, what can they expect to see down the road?
Right.
Can they find, it won't be, these are our words of compilation of, experiences, but is there something in there that there's empathy, there's understanding, there's some compassion, there's perspective, that he's starting to get. He's not blaming, minimizing, gaslighting anymore.
Right. Gaslighting. Yes. That's a popular term these days. Wendy, go ahead.
Yeah. One of the pieces that Dan and I thought was really important for this book, a number of pieces, but one of the pieces was to have questions at the end of each section. And so I think my hope is, my hope certainly that clinicians will start using this book, working with couples where there has been infidelity. It doesn't even have to be sex addiction. It can be an affair, and,
Right.
and this book can be applicable. And, I haven't tried this. Well, I haven't tried this out with any of my friends. And could couples be using the book and using the questions at the end for self-reflection and for communication around an affair that's happened? I don't know if I would advise that without a clinician or a therapist intervention.
Right.
But the questions are definitely there to explore their feelings about what these letters have brought to light.
Absolutely. Oh, well, I'm so glad that you both wanted to come on the show and talk about this, and Wendy, that you wanted to come back on again. I know we met at the National Conference on Addiction Disorders. Actually, you didn't go to it, but you came to a dinner hosted by Rob Weiss. And that's how
Right.
we met.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It's true.
Kristen, I'm wondering, I know you asked, I don't know if we have enough time, but there's a letter, if it's helpful to read.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I wanted to
Dan.
read one. It's a page and a half, but what it does is it shows an earlier letter, and then there's a response to it. Someone responds back to it as he's kind of progressed down the road. So it gives you an example of what you might see earlier on versus later.
Okay.
That's okay?
Perfect.
Okay. I'll try and read it quickly. So this is It Takes Two, and this is the Take Two version of that letter. So the first letter that the person reads is, "My sponsor told me not to say anything about this, but how can I not? I'm sick of this. All the responsibility gets put on me. Somehow I'm made out to be this monster who did horrible things to you. You've already ruined our relationships with friends and family by telling them all about what I did. You constantly treat me like garbage and violate my privacy by looking through all my stuff. But I'm the problem? Take a look at yourself for once. Maybe when you start looking at yourself, you'll find that there was a good reason I did what I did." So that's the first part, which is pretty rough. That's early on. He doesn't get it, obviously. And then there's a response after this. He's looking back. So he says, "Part of cleaning out the wreckage of my past includes making amends for things I've said and done that have harmed others. To do this step work, I've been looking through old letters and recovery work. I stumbled across this old letter to you, and I'm appalled. Yes, these are my words, but it's hard for me to relate to the man who said them. God, I'm so sorry. I said and did some awful things to you. Not only did I violate our most basic agreements in the relationship before getting into recovery, I also continue to hurt you once we got into recovery. I can barely remember the man who said those things to you, but I can only imagine how many other horrible things I said and did. In my shame, I did what I've always done, put the blame back on you. I was such a hypocrite to tell you to look at yourself, and I wouldn't even look at my own actions and inactions. I'll be working on a more complete amends to you. I no longer avoid the pain I've inflicted on you, but I hope that the man I'm becoming will be living amends to you each and every day. So that's one example of earlier on, the guy's, he's blame shifting, and then later on he's reflecting, he's in recovery. So you can see a difference in how he or she is thinking about himself in the relationship.
And then understanding that, yes, it's wonderful that the addict gets to this place. And they also, the reason why therapy with people like you that are trained in this is so vital is because they also need to understand that just because they're there does not mean that their partner is there.
True.
You know, that's the interesting piece. The partner's going on their own journey and their own trauma. And really, for me, that trauma to heal, you get pluses when you're the one in addiction for, 30 days, 60 days, 90, you get a reward system for not doing the thing. I don't see where a partner gets that same reward system. So they don't get a chip for, hey, I stuck in it for 30 days. Hey, I did it. Right. That's the piece I feel like, is, I don't know that it's missing, but it's, they don't get that same reward system that the addict does. And that's where the disparity lies.
Right.
So if we can figure out that, then we're golden.
Yeah. Their reward is not feeling crazy for maybe a day. Yeah.
Or an hour even.
Being able to
or
breathe.
A minute.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But they don't get a chip for it in a meeting. So, yeah.
No. And in fact, sometimes family members and friends will, still say, oh, you still with that asshole?
Right.
I can't believe, if it were me, I would leave that jerk. You get that instead.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Or the other, it's like, he's in recovery, so can you just get over it?
Just move on.
Right. That's the word.
Right. That happens a lot.
Come on, he's trying.
Oh yeah. And I've been there. I've been there too. I did a show with someone where I finally, apologized to not anyone in particular, but to anyone that I might have offended in my own. Why would somebody stay with someone like that? They must be an unempowered person that they would tolerate this because of how I was being treated by their spouse. I was being objectified and so on. And I really came to that realization of, okay, blaming the spouse that's in that relationship is not where blame needs to go at all. They don't deserve that. They're dealing with enough.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
There's perpetration, but it's not by the victim.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, you all will have to come on again because there's so much more to talk about on this subject. So I hope you consider an open invitation anytime you want to digest or, take another deep dive into these topics. You're welcome anytime.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll take you up on that, I'm thinking. Yeah.
Wendy, let's start with you. Please let our listeners know where they can find out about the book, say the book title again, and also where they can find out about you.
Sure. The book title is Letters from a Sex Addict, My Mind Exposed, and the book came out just a couple of weeks ago. That website, www.lettersfromasexaddict.com. My website is www.wendyconquest.com or www.sacc.center.
Wonderful.
And there's email information on both those websites. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
Wonderful. And Dan, how can people find out about you?
Well, my website's www.dandrakemft.com, And I really try to put helpful links on there so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I really want to make sure that we can provide some help and support. I really believe that for anyone listening, that this is something that there is healing from, there is hope, and I will continue to hold hope. And I'm passionate about that. So DanDrakeMFT.com is
Amazon and Kindle. It's absolutely live there. So.
Wonderful. And we'll have those links up too with your blog article. So thank you both for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another edition of Mental Health News Radio.
Please join us next time on Blog Talk Radio/Mental Health News. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. We love hearing from our listeners. Visit mentalhealthnewsradio.com for a list of all of our shows and mhnrnetwork.com to check out all of our amazing podcasters on our network. If you'd like to be a guest on our show, send an email to our wonderful program director, Melanie, at mentalhealthnewsradio.com. And now a final word from our therapy dog, Miles.
Good boy.